roundtable with our moderator, I believe, joining us from London to talk about, with the panel we have here on the table on the screen, we are going to look at the energizing the market in Europe. Stéphanie Léouzon, is she with us? Ah, yes. Okay, Stéphanie, hello. Hi. We have some problems with sound.
They're just unmuting me.
Fantastic.
Right? Can you hear me?
Thank you, Stéphanie. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see everybody. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see my slides, but I will ask to have my slides presented. I've been asked to give an overview of the markets for the context. If you could just put my first slide up. There we go. Okay, so if I could have the next slide. So the public biopharma sector is looking a bit stormy at the moment. A lot of change last week. We saw that the rally in the NASDAQ Biotech Index, the rally since mid-July has been fully erased as of last week. The NASDAQ Biotech sector was down 5.6% last week. The XBI ETF was down 4% last week, and the European BioTK index was down 3% last week, but 10% in the last month. So quite a significant change. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. And why is the market dropping now? The news from Washington was actually relatively positive, with the industry pricing reform getting bogged down, and M&A, if anything, seems to be perhaps picking up with the Acceleron deal. But what we've seen in the markets is that while the specialist investors remain, the generalist investors seem to be pulling away, moving into other sectors that offer perhaps greater growth. So oil and gas, for example, with rising prices has been getting attention. And so that's creating a number of issues for the sector. And we've also had other comments about things like limited M&A activity. If I could have the next slide, please. It's also important to look at the macroeconomic environment. And in the last month, it has not been very positive for the stock market. We've seen Treasury yields rise significantly. The volatility index has increased significantly, so it's harder to finance a naturally volatile sector like biotech when the whole market is volatile. Also, consumer price index of 5% inflation since September 2020, and so inflation might be becoming less transient. So there are a number of concerns in general around the market. If I could have the next slide, please. We looked also at the change in value of all biotech by subsectors, and it's been quite interesting to see how that has been changing. Market decline has been strongest in gene therapy and immunology and RNA, whereas capital has been moving into areas like gene editing and protein degradation. Not surprisingly, vaccines have held up well. Rare disease has been relatively flat. And additionally, not on this page, the research tools companies are down really significantly, like 80% in the same time frame. If I could have the next slide, please. Also looking at aggregate change in value based on the market cap. So the NASDAQ Biotech Index has been very strong, but that's really large companies with very large market caps, and that index is weighted by market cap. On the contrary, if your valuation, for example, was around $1 billion in February, you might have felt like you were in more of a bear market. So 3/4 of microcap companies have traded down since February, and anyone from companies in aggregate less than 10 billion have been trading down. If I could have the next slide, please. So public equity offerings, if we look at biotech IPO, biopharma IPO volume globally, it's been at near record levels throughout 2021 and then fell dramatically in August. August is usually a little bit slow, but even in August 2020 was half the level of volume seen in, August 21 was half the level of volume seen in in 2020. IPO activity in September has been up, and we'll have to go see where that goes. If I could have the next slide, please. Looking specifically in Europe, this is a little bit hard to read, but we looked at the last 3 years by month. So on the face of it, it looks, potentially quite attractive with monthly funds raised, from in many months from $400 to $900 million in the course of 2021. But when you look at it and break it down, this is European companies doing IPOs in the US and Europe. And if you look at the data and break it down, to raise serious money, European companies have been defaulting to NASDAQ. 70% of the funds raised have been on NASDAQ. Europe's 3 biggest local deals in the local markets ranged between $85 and $125 million. And in 2021, EU deal sizes ranged from 2 million to 106 million. That's 30 deals with a median of 8. There were some larger deals in there, 106, 83, 45, but those are relatively small amounts relative to what's been raised in the US. If I could have the next slide, please. Interestingly, a UK company, Exscientia, which is in AI drug discovery, raised $465 million last week in an IPO and a concurrent private placement. They chose to do that in the US. If I could have the next slide, please. Looking at follow-on volume for equity, that's actually been quite strong globally, $6 billion a month. There was a little bit higher activity in 2020, but this has been pretty consistently strong. If I could have the next slide. And in Europe, the follow-on financing market has also been, pretty strong for European companies. But when you look at it, for example, and again, break it down, in August, there was $672 million raised by European companies. 2 companies raised 500 of that. So 8 companies with the other 172 million. And in September, 666 million was raised, but 600 of that was raised by CureVac in the US. If I could have the next slide, please. So looking at private capital markets, this is what I often call the wall of money. This is the amount of money that's been raised by life science venture capital funds since 2000. And you can see that in 2020 basically dwarfs any years before that. $30 billion raised in 2020 and 22 billion raised in 2021 year to date. So that's really a dramatic change. And that money is looking for a place to go. If we could have the next slide, please. So monthly global biopharma private equity placements have been really, really strong. And you can see that that has continued. And that's really being driven by the huge amounts of capital that are available to invest. And if we look at the next slide, you'll see that in Europe, we've seen a significant amount of funds raised here for companies as well. Really strong, broad activity across the piece. 768 million raised in June, 525 in July, 257 in September. This trend seems to be continuing. And if we just have the next slide, please, looking at M&A. And next slide, thank you. Global biopharma M&A volume actually has been quite light. The last 3 bars on the right are the first 3 quarters of 2021. And that's why market commentators are talking about more limited M&A activity. Interestingly, in September, we've had both the $11 billion Acceleron deal and the $9 billion Sobi deal. So we may be starting to see signs of life in the M&A environment. Next slide, please, talks about the European M&A activity. And of course, in September, that very large bar includes the Sobi deal. But interestingly, since 2020, there were 16 deals of size, let's say. And it's interesting to note that only 3 of those were public companies, Biotest, Sobi, and GW. And so there are a number of private deals like Kymab, Mir, Candy, Themis. Those all range from around $1 billion to $1.5 billion, and those companies were acquired when they were private. So that's an interesting change to think about. And with that in mind, I think we can stop the slides in the interest of time, and we can introduce the panel. Okay, great. So I see Cédric. Focus on Cédric. So I'll introduce the panel quickly. Maybe up on the screen next to me, you see Hans Herklots, who's a managing director at LifeSci Advisors. And then from left to right, Cédric Moreau, who is partner in the crossover fund at Sofinova, and then Elsy Boglioli, who's the founder and CEO of BioUp, and then Laurent Levy, who's the CEO of, sorry, I'm blanking on the company name, excuse me.
Nanobiotix.
Thank you, Cédric. And then Guillaume Morelli, who's the head of SMEs for the Euronext. So sorry about that, Laurent. So that's kind of an interesting set of slides. The title of this panel is Energizing the Market in Europe. Looking at some of the data that we just seen, there's a significant difference between the US and Europe. Maybe we should put that in context because there's actually been quite a lot of progress made so far. And maybe Guillaume, you could, from the Euronext perspective, speak briefly about, that historical context.
Thank you very much. Well, if we look at how to re-energize and so maybe look a bit at the past, we should be proud about what we have achieved collectively around the last decade. Because 10 years ago, when we raised 20 million euros for Valneva, it was like a public holiday in France because it was the first time a health tech company have been able to raise such a large amount of money. And 10 years after, now we have built a pan-European market for health tech, Euronext. Euronext now is larger than the LSE plus Switzerland plus Deutsche Börse on health tech. And a few months ago, Argenix raised 1.1 billion euro being listed on Euronext. It means that collectively, together with Laurent, together with Sofinnova, together with all the people that are around this conference, we have been able to achieve something great. Of course, we know that there is some room of improvement, especially if we look at what is happening in the US. But no, we can build unicorn in health tech in Europe. We have plenty of it. We lack unicorns, we lack flagship, we'll know. But first one, we should be proud about what we achieved. But if I can continue, if we look at how the first one succeed to build such very nice stories, is that we should not forget that we are a European. A European in the health tech can be an advantage. Because if we look at Nanobiotix or whatever, I won't talk about Nanobiotix because you will do it better than me. But first, if we are able to convince the strength and the investor of these continents, then we can attract more easily the specialists in the US. And if we have done these two steps, then we can get the generalists across the world, across Europe, of course, across Asia, and across the US. And if you reach the 3 steps, I think that everything is possible. And the last part, I think that is very important, and that is new compared to a decade ago, is that the entrepreneur in the health tech industry are much more prepared than before. We still have some people that needs to be more familiar about the capital market and how they can use it, but collectively, we developed a large amount of initiatives. For example, at Euronext, we developed a pre-IPO program called TechShare that gives the entrepreneur all the tools to understand what is happening, all the tools to challenge the advisors that propose for an IPO or a new round, an IPO in this marketplace or in the other, etc. At the end of the day, if you are aware about the potential and you can challenge it, I think you will get the right decision at the right timing, which is quite important.
Thank you. And yet, with all of this in mind, is the European market still relatively fragmented in terms of, we don't have sort of a pan-European market. How do you think that poses issues for companies? And anyone, please chime in. Hans? I think you need to unmute.
Excuse me, can you repeat your question?
We were just talking about the European market being fragmented versus a pan-European market, which is, sort of what the US enjoys. Do you think that poses issues for companies?
It's certainly a challenge. Nothing cannot be overcome, but I think the pockets, as Cédric knows, because he's competing and working together with American investors, the pockets of capital in the US are simply deeper. There's the equity research from the banks, et cetera, et cetera. There are many advantages there. I think, as Guillaume pointed out, Europe has its strength, undoubtedly. What we encounter in our work with our clients, with our companies, that we prepare for corporate access for investors, to investors globally, Europe, US, and Israel. So we have a ringside seat when we bring them out, so to say, is that the entrepreneurial skill set of Europe is formidable. The science is great, the technology is great. We see sometimes that it's a little bit too local. So we recommend always to build international teams for the management and the board, to diversify, to stick your head out the window and learn from practices in other countries and other markets. That is vital for success in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Laurent, as the CEO of a company that's looked at raising funds on both sides of the Atlantic, I guess, is it critical to list on NASDAQ, or is it a necessary step in the evolution of a company?
I think that's a good question. I don't have the answer yet. But I can tell that it's important to get good investors on board. Europe have some, US has some and a bit more. So I would say, if you develop a product that has a market in the US, then going to NASDAQ may be a very good opportunity. Not requires a lot of work like everything we do.
Cédric, did you have some thoughts about that?
When we decided to launch the Sofinova crossover fund, so 3 years ago, I think it was really in a way to try to energize the market, and the idea was really to avoid this gap between the private equity and the public equity. And crossover means to us having a continuum on both sides and just developing the company and helping CEOs as Laurent to make the company growing and going a step further. The way we try to define the strategy and how to energize and helping our company to grow is first, of course, bring capital. It was perfectly said. So we have a $500 million fund. It's not so bad in Europe, but it's pretty nothing if we compare with our US peers. So, of course, we need more capital. But by having this kind of fund in Europe, it helps also to attract external and international inflows. So we are leading our European deals, but together we are able, exactly as Laurent mentioned, trying to attract some co-investors, international investors that are on par our peers in the US or in Asia, and be aligned on the strategy, how we want to grow. And it was perfectly said by Guillaume. It's at certain point of time it could be a two-step approach, building the shareholder base in Europe, but then bringing a crossover round to prepare, I think, the big splash in the NASDAQ. So capital for sure, but it's not all about capital. It's also about talents. Network. I'm sure Elsy will have some words about that. It's also helping attracting the right people at the right moment, because running a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3 is not the same. I would say risk reward is not the same skills you need at the C-level, at the board level. So it's also the way we try to energize the market. And one of my last word on this would be, by also bringing and preparing better the private market, I'm sure Guillaume and Euronext will be pleased in the coming years, having companies very well prepared with a clear equity story, not be desesperated when they go into IPO, but just because they want to accelerate and having access to broader capital. So all the work we are doing with all the private funds, the dedicated and sophisticated team in the private should fuel and help to energize also the public market. So it's really the way we see as a continuum and continuous effort to make this happen. Maybe you want to...
Yeah, I could not agree more, actually. Sorry, Stephanie, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I was going to say, Elsy, did you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. So I work with CEOs in the healthcare space, including private and listed companies. And I think it's quite interesting to see that some view the IPO as a success in and of itself. I managed to, IPO a company, whether in Europe or in the US. And I think what we're all saying here around this table is it's about the companies and it's about bringing innovation to patients. It's not about being on this or that market. And I think we need to be very careful not to go too fast. And there is a trend of, in Europe now, doing more what has been done in the US for a few years, which is raising larger private rounds. I think there's a lot of virtue in that, because once you're public, you're public. Of course, you can take a company private, but for those who have tried, it's pretty difficult. And no one really wants to have to do that. So you can go as far as possible to build a team, build a portfolio, and make sure you're robust so that when you do decide to reach the public market and to become a listed company, you have the infrastructure, you have the news flow to actually have a successful track. It's not only about how much you raise in the IPO, it's about the next steps. And I think, we talk about re-energizing the market, and I think indeed we're doing a great job recently. If we're honest, you also need great companies to have a great market. And I think in the past decade, maybe in Europe, we did have a trend of some companies going public too early. If you compare, not necessarily too early in terms of years of seniority of a company, but too early in terms of stage of development, breadth and depth of portfolio, size of team. And if you do it too early, then you risk, losing big, having your stock, which is, not praised and not well treated, neither by institutional investors nor by retail. And a number of European companies have an important retail base that they have trouble dealing with. And I think this is something which more and more our companies and also our investment funds are learning to try to avoid, and indeed grooming companies through several rounds of private investment, I think is something that we need to do more and more in Europe. And as Laurent said, NASDAQ is accessing the right investors. It's not a goal per se, and it's also not every day a pleasure. So I think you need to tread carefully when it comes to a NASDAQ IPO.
Please, Laurent?
Yes, just wanted to add something, because before going public, I was wondering for myself, should I do it? What are the constraints? Is anyone can help me? So if some of you are asking the same question, what I've learned in the past few years is, first of all, it's doable. There's plenty of teams that are now very well trained to do that. So it's not getting public. That is the hardest thing, is what you do with it. And if I wish I've done something differently in the past, I would have had a team more prepared with more resources before getting there, especially in terms of communication, finance, that would have helped in delivering. And what I've learned over the past years also, it's all about the credibility you install with the investors, your ability to deliver what you have said, and the value of your product too. But those two things are very important, and we often forget, and I've seen that in many companies going public, the importance of QA, regulatory, CMC, manufacturing, all the things that are critical for having a good product. But the good thing is that there's plenty of people that know to do that. So if I have one word to say is, talk to people that have done it, and they can help you to find the right path and the right people to help you. And it's, as usual, all about humans, so just talk.
And we actually have a specific roundtable on this topic tomorrow. So about talent, about having the right talent, and I think it is something critical. And indeed, the burden also in terms of financial teams, communication, and link with the investor community. Not only in Europe, but if you go on NASDAQ, is something that you need to make sure you have the people to help you with that.
I think that's very important also, even for, you know, private investment, when you're looking to attract larger investors, specialist investors on either side of the Atlantic, but particularly in the US. Do you experience that they maybe look at things through a different lens or with a broader set of requirements than might be required if you were only listed here in Europe?
I can start, Laurent, and then you answer. So if I share my experience, I remember the first time I have to share a due diligence that I did during 3 months. And before just pushing the button, under CDA, of course, and pushing the button to send it to one of potential US crossover. And honestly, I had a bit of pressure, and be sure that I'm okay with the package they are expected and the level of deepness and due diligence. At the end of the day, we think here, as Guillaume mentioned, no shame, nothing we do better or worse. I think we are all able to go into details and assessing from the technology to the clinical trial pathway, the regulatory, the market access. I do not see exactly something different here, but what is really, I think, important is particularly the ambition, and sometimes I think we can see how they can think bigger, further, and maybe it's a kind of European mindset where we are a bit too shy, but if we compare with our US peers, so it's not a question of work, not a question of due diligence quality, but maybe what we can learn is really the ambition, and there is never too big, it's never enough capitalized. So I really think that is also what we try to infuse in our company, in our European company, to really think big, but also to anticipate. Because I really feel that sometimes, and many times in a company, we are thinking about the next value inflection point, the next issue to fix, but not really having the strategic view and the long-term ambitions. So I think maybe Laurent, you can share your experience, but it's really what we try to feed, the way we try to feed our company and to put the standard, not just question of due diligence, but mindset and long-term vision.
Yeah, sure. I personally did not notice big differences between the biotech investor in Europe or France or US in terms of the way they analyze the market and what they look for. The depth of their pocket is very important also, because if you have a 100 million fund versus 20 billion and you put your money at work, then you will be willing to take more risk to finance bigger program if you have 20 billion versus 100 million. So that could make a difference, especially if your market has many of those investors. What was striking for me is when I moved from a VC world where getting money could take months or years, going public for the first time, when I've been exposed to generalist investor first. When you go in the meeting, 1 hour after, they give you millions. That's very weird, but that's how it's happening. And then going back to more specialized investor, where it could take 5 years to convince them over the time after you have delivered, after they have made all the due diligence and you have generated the piece of data they want to see. So I will say there's no general rules about investor, but it's all about who they are and how they're gonna make their money. And then you can categorize those investors with different buckets. But at the end, it's all about delivering and about science.
Stephanie, if I just can add to what Cédric and Laurent just said, I think to Cédric's point and Laurent's point, the quality of the investors is very similar. They're as smart, as knowledgeable in Europe as in the US or China. Let's not forget about China, by the way. I think what makes the US investor a little bit different when they look at European propositions, the lens is not the science, the technology, the entrepreneurs. It's, are they coming to the US at some point? I think that is vital for their decision to invest. And it can be 1 year from now, it can be 3 years from now, but to have that down the line, I think is very important for the US investors, because they know, as we just said at the outset of our panel, for a sustainable investment in these companies, the US pockets are deeper, as Laurent just said, are just more far-reaching than anywhere else. So I think that it's more mechanical than the quality of the people and the expertise per se.
The pharmaceutical market, of course, is also very large in the US for a variety of reasons. So I guess investors want to have insight, that you'll have some local knowledge. Many companies, that I work with get asked, when are you opening a US subsidiary? It's not just we're going to have a headquarters in Paris and that's where everybody sits, right? At a headquarters. There's an idea that people want to have at the very least transatlantic teams in place to access the expertise.
And one point to a point that Elsy just made about the IPO is not the sort of the end station. We always tell our clients that's when it really starts, and Laurent seems to bear that out in his comments. It's not the IPO, it's the follow-on, and the next one. So the catalyst shouldn't just lead up to a crossover round for Cédric, an IPO, but really what is down the line, because it's the follow-on investments that really create the liquidity in the stock that are so important. Anyway.
Maybe if I can add.
And in terms of the Europe,
sorry, just talking about the US investors that are active in Europe, because also this is something new that but no, it can be used by European health tech. Don't forget that now roughly 40% of the investment in European health tech listed in Europe are made by US investors. And actually, 5 years ago, or maybe a bit more, 7 years ago, it was hardly zero because they were US-based investors focusing on US-listed companies. But now they are much more global than they used to be. The European ecosystem is able to attract them, and we are all working on it. And I think also this is something to take into account. Even today, they are here.
And I think what you're saying, Guillaume, is also that it's not required to list on NASDAQ to attract US investors. Is that part of what you're saying?
Less and less, actually, yes.
Yeah.
Can I add something about, is it needed to be present in the US when we want to be listed on the NASDAQ or attract investors? I think not. If your market is not in the US, you don't need to be there. But if your market is in the US, then by definition, you need to have people there to develop the product. That's easier, that's part of the game. And then you need presence to educate people, the market from a product perspective, but also the market from a financial perspective. So for me, it's all about what is your business and how do you develop your business in general. And then investors come on top because it makes sense for you to be there or not.
I agree. If I may add to that, I think one thing which sometimes from a European perspective we underestimate is the expertise needed in managing discussions with the FDA. They're professionals who have done that all their life. And in the US, there's really this culture of ex-FDA people becoming consultants and helping companies manage these discussions. And sometimes in some countries in Europe and in France, for example, we don't have this culture of actually crossover in the sense of from the agency to the companies. And we don't leverage that enough. And so from that perspective, it's not necessarily having a huge operations base in the US, but indeed, as Laurent is saying, if your market is in the US, you need to specifically hire some key people who will have the right contacts and the right expertise in managing the FDA. And with the FDA requirements come things like CMC and quality, where the standards can be different in Europe and in the US. And it's very important to anticipate these, because these are not things which you can fix overnight. And so if you are going to the US, you really need to think years ahead in terms of CMC, quality, and FDA strategy.
And I know it's not the topic, but if you can engage as soon as possible with regulatory agencies, that's very good. I would always recommend that.
And Stephanie, if you may, because I was a bit, it was not shocked, but you mentioned in your slide the fact that M&A was pretty low in terms of activity, particularly in Europe, because here we are talking about financial market, NASDAQ. And of course, as an investor at Sofinova, if we look back to our 30, 40 years of history investing in biotech, we have the majority, more than 50% of the exit are just M&A exit. So it's super important, and most of the time is what we prefer, because you have an acquisition premium, you can sell your 100% of your position. So it's something super important in the way, of course, we are looking at our investment opportunity. And I think one thing where also we try to energize the market and to is also be prepared to the equity story for the NASDAQ investors and so on, but also helping our company, our CEO, to be prepared to discuss also on par with big pharma companies. And I think it's also a way where we can improve our value creation, improve the way we can find the right partners. Could be sometimes a crossover fund, like the one I'm working on every day, but sometimes could be a partner and a commercial partner, or or any partner from a corporate that brings some specific bricks and expertise that are not able to be accessible here in Europe, or too costly to develop. So I think also it's one way where we can energize this market, and particularly the M&A market, to bring in the talents, but bringing the expertise inside to be as deep, as strong through a due diligence process with a big pharma and so on. So, and at certain point of time, the way to be better in the negotiation, because we know some difference. If you do a partnership in Europe, it's something very well recognized as a value, because it de-risk in fact your asset. If you are crossing the ocean and going to the US, a partnership sometimes is why why did you do that? All the value now is outside. You have to keep it internally, So that's the reason why I think here we and particularly in Europe we have also to improve this and enhance the standard level. And it could be an explanation, but also a source of optimism why in the current years we'll have more M&A activity or business BD activity. I don't know.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Stephanie, a company that Cédric and I both have some experience with, Symetis, transcatheter aortic valve company in Switzerland, that was sold to Boston Scientific for $425 million in 2015, Cédric, if I'm correct, is a great example of medical technology developed in Europe and finally ending up on the M&A block to one of the great medtech companies in the US. France has an incredible tradition in orthopedic innovation, all centered around Toulouse. And one of the advantages of Europe, interestingly, is that the approval of these products is faster in Europe. The commercial proof of concept is faster than in the US. So many of the big medtech players in the US, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Zimmer, Stryker, buy their products in Europe and then, get the approval, the 510K, etc. done. So Europe is, a cradle of innovation in its own right. Brings in a lot of money, which flows back into the space.
It's interesting looking at M&A. I did a list of sort of the more sizable European M&A deals from beginning of 2020, and it was about 16 deals ranging in value from sort of 200 million up to, of course, Sobi being off the charts at 9.5 billion. But it's interesting that the vast majority of those companies stayed private, before they were taken out. Is there anything to learn from that? Or I personally was surprised by that. Does anyone have any comments?
It's a tricky one.
I know.
Maybe I can't answer to your question, but maybe I can give, let's say, another tool, another idea that can fit this need. In fact, because we all know that in the health tech industry, M&A is part of the equity story for investors, because this is where health tech have been created as a sector. So we need deals, we need partnership, we need M&A. But at Euronext, we have a kind of bit different ambition for the next years, because we believe that we don't need more praise in Europe, but we need more predators. We need health tech that are able to consolidate the European market, because we all know it's a fragmented one. We all know that we have plenty of small innovative companies, but maybe a lack of European champion. And we believe that SPACs in health tech in Europe to consolidate the industry here and being listed and be able to attract the largest amount of money will be part of the solutions. We work on several projects, so maybe there will be announcement soon on it also from a European ecosystem. But we strongly believe that building new predators companies that are able to create champion will be part of the solution.
And maybe to your question, there's also a certain amount of beneficial arrogance in US experienced seasoned entrepreneurs who don't let their companies get bought at early stages. They turn down offers, I think, more easily than some of our European companies do. Because if you've sold 1-2 companies, you're not looking for money, you're looking for the big splash that Cédric was discussing earlier. You're not open to early stage M&A because what you want is the big SPAC deal. It's the amazing IPO. And if you look at recent, serial entrepreneurs, the founders of companies like Sana and Liel, the amounts these companies raise is absolutely huge in a record amount of time. So it's a different mindset, and I think that's why I completely agree. Also, we need champions, we need predators, and we need champions, and these champions will help us have strong companies which turn down offers and wait until they in turn become champions.
That's a really interesting point.
Just would like to add something about that. When you look at the European market versus the US market also, and I've heard that often that in European market, coming from generalists that are truly a big part of the market, is when are you making money and where you start making benefit. Whereas in the US, it's more what's your next investment, what's your next clinical trial, when is the next critical data showing your product works, and when do you get FDA approval, which is completely a different mindset. But being public, if you want to get US investor on board, you will have to make this stretch, and either to take everyone, knowing that you will have some people that won't be happy about it, or really explain our business model and explain them that they should not get in if they want to exit in 18 months or in 12 months. And I think that's one of the driver which is complex in Euronext too sometimes. First of all, that's some company that should not go public because it's too soon or the technology is not good, but that's what it is. Or also the educated investors, I mean, are less present in this market. And if you have your fund and want to make your return on invest and are happy with a 20% premium, then you're happy at the end of the year, you sell the shares, and sometimes you don't let the company grow. So I'm not saying they are bad, they are making liquidity and everything. It's just that it's a complex equilibrium, a complex balance, what we try to find, and we just need to play with the rules.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. We want to check if there are any questions from the audience.
So I'm reading, public and private risk capital in Europe are still very shy. From my point of view, both using wrong risk evaluation criteria about innovation risk. Do you see changes in the short term or only more blah, blah, blah? It's for me? Who want to take this one?
But I don't know for the risk appetite you will tell, but first thing we can see is that the private and public equity is able to invest a larger amount of money than it used to be. So at least, I don't know if we take more risk, but we take more bets.
Yeah, and I think to be honest is we talk about we are talking about also culture, mindset. We had a very interesting panels this morning to say also at the European level or the public level, changing our mindset in Europe to put also public money at risk, and so as a private VC, of course, risk is part of the game. So I don't think we are. I think even more shy, or because I talk about more probably less ambitious. So it's more on the reward that sometimes we do not see the full potential, or not ready to align and be prepared to accompany the company until all and delivering all the potential. For instance, for us, we set our investment period between 3 to 5 years to generate and deliver 3 to 5x. And why we decided this is just because we think that 3, 4, 5 years, that's the time where we can pick a project at the proof of concept level. So basically you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in biotech, so you are pretty much at the phase 2, in the middle of your clinical development, and helping the company to scale up and making this growth phase to pretty much reach the market. And at this time, we think that it's a different game, and probably you need private equity investor or having a big pharma company that could take the products through a partnership, a licensing deal, or a true M&A. So that would be my point and my view.
Cédric, I'm not sure if I got your point correctly, but to put more public money at risk, was that the question yesterday?
In fact, I just referring to what was said during some panels this morning, and just talking about the mindset in Europe.
Yeah, no, I'm just making the point that probably, and it's important for people out there to realize that public money is put at risk every day, because the limited partners of the VC community in Europe and everywhere are pension funds, healthcare insurance firms. So or the EIF, actually, the European Investment Fund. So my private money, my pension contribution is put at risk every day by the VCs. And that connection is sometimes lost. And I think it's vital to make that clear to the public at large, actually. They're players in this market, even if they don't know it.
Maybe one last point on the. Sorry, I was just going to comment one last point on the risk profile, and I think Laurent touched on it. Your appetite for high risk is different if you're managing a 500 million fund and you can make a given number of investments, or if you're managing 10x that, because then you can, of course, distribute your portfolio. So I think this is changing, and we see the amount of funds raised in Europe, which is becoming greater and greater, and funds like Sofinnova Crossover, or more recently JATO in France, are showing that we can increase the size, and then probably the risk appetite comes with that.
Any questions on the audience? Oh, I have one question for Guillaume.
Okay, this one
was not
prepared.
expected. No, what about, because we are talking about NASDAQ, what about an index or a European index that could really bring and connecting the dots and really help the public equity market to really have more fertilization and visibility?
Actually, because he asked for it last week already. So, but actually, this is very good idea, because we discussed about it. So the European ecosystem is building up, but I think also you can confirm it. We need to achieve another step to consolidate the European market and to create a pan-European market for retail investors on health tech, because it will be also a way to support larger companies, stronger liquidity, and maybe larger amount of money raised by the most promising one. An index could fit the need, so we need to look at it further. Great idea.
Do you have a date for that?
Maybe 2022. No, but it's a great idea. You're right.
Good, and maybe just a transition to the next panel, because I know that it's a new initiative. We are talking about energizing the market, and we have a LSA that is a new initiative to put together all the European VC and having and be able to speaking from one voice, and well, is something that for Sofinova we like to encourage this kind of initiative. So it's just a transition to the next panel and next fire chat. So please stay in the room. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Keep that in mind. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much to Stephanie and to the panel here this afternoon. We're taking a 5-minute break now. Then we're going to be meeting our first keynote, who will be talking about just that, the essential role of risk capital for life sciences companies. 5 minutes at 4:50.